All right, all right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Coffee Q&A, your daily coffee Q&A. We're here with the coffee that a friend of mine roasted this last week. How y'all doing today? How y'all doing? This is the Ethiopia Guji, and it's from Ethiopia, like I said. So how's it going? Hope everything's good. I'm Jay. Good back. I was thinking about this morning a little while ago, and I was thinking, you know what? We haven't done a live stream since Wednesday. July 3rd. It feels like it's been a long time. I was like, wow, it feels like it's been a long time. So good to have you back. How's everything going? Today, this is a coffee that was roasted last week. I think actually on Tuesday, I think it was. And it was roasted by a friend of mine, Porter, on Matt's new W6A Gießen. So Porter got this coffee from Sweet Maria's. This is the Ethiopia dry process Guji Buku. And the Guji Buku is a really, well, I don't know. I got it because Matt was like, hey, man, try this coffee. It's got this really strong blueberry character. And I was like, oh, I love blueberry naturals. I love it. I just can't get enough of it. But, over the years, I really haven't had blueberry naturals that are really like blueberry. I like super blueberry forward coffees. Like if it's blueberry forward, I love it. Like, the first time I ever had a coffee like that was back in 2003. I was in Portland, Oregon for this trade show back then called the NASCOR, the North American Specialty Coffee Retailers Trade Show. It's no longer in existence. It used to be put on by one of the companies, one of the publication companies, and this guy that was the publisher of the magazine, as well as the organizer of the event, really gregarious guy, and he passed away quite a number of years ago. But it was a show that I went to, my very first, well, not really my first show, technically my second trade show. My very first trade show was the SCAA trade show that happened in April of that year in Boston. I went, this is in now September of 2003. And my very first one, Mom, how are you? And good morning to you. And I go to this trade show, and I'm taking this course on how to make espresso. Like there was this company that was giving espresso classes, and I was like, okay, so I'm totally new, don't really know what I'm doing, I have no idea how to make espresso. So I thought, let me fly out to Portland, go to this event, and take this class. I think the class was like 3 days, the entire time of the trade show. And I'm in this trade show, and I'm sitting there with this guy, this British dude. He's a few years older than me. And he also was learning how to make espresso. And he was about to open a shop up in Whidbey Island in Washington State. But for some reason, he wants to be friends, and we get along pretty well, and we're hanging, we're talking. And he's like, hey, man, you want to go check out these coffee shops? And I was like, yeah, let's go check it out. Honestly, I was like, I just kind of want to be alone. I don't know, but all right, I'll go hang out with you. Why do you want to be friends? I don't really get it. But we go to this place. It's he said, let's go to check out the new Stumptown. And back in 2003, the Stumptown that is in downtown Portland at 3rd and Ash was brand new. It just had opened. Dwayne had just opened it. And actually, I didn't know Dwayne at the time to say that, but I would get to know Dwayne after this point. So we go down there, and back then they did this service where they did French presses of coffees. So they would French press the coffee, pour them in the air pots, leave them out, and then you would pump them and serve yourself. And back then they had this Ethiopian harar. So by this point, I'd already heard about coffees that had blueberry notes to it. And I was like, that seems weird. I don't really understand that. Okay. But I get this Ethiopian harar. I pump it out. And I taste it. And it's like, oh my gosh. Like, I have never, well, I mean, I wasn't really into coffee. I was into flavored coffees. Right? Up until this point, I had drank things like hazelnut with 6 packets of, 16-ounce hazelnut with 6 packets of sugar and lots of cream. And then by this point, had opened my first coffee version, and we were serving all Hawaiian coffees. and I brought some coffees in from Royal Coffee in Honolulu. No, I'm sorry, Lion Coffee in Honolulu, where they did things like chocolate macadamia, vanilla macadamia, hazelnut macadamia. We brought those in. We're serving those made in like bun, those bun glass urn brewers. But that was the extent. So I'm tasting this coffee, and wow, it has. Dan, how are you? Good to see you, man. It has this amazing, crazy, clear blueberry flavor, and I'm like, what is this craziness? There's no cream, there's no sugar. It's just this delicious blueberryness, and I'm like, wow. I was so blown away. Actually, that whole weekend of being in Portland, Oregon, in September 2003 was really like a moment for me to, it really was the moment that defined me to get into coffee, like into the path that I went to, right? So I went to this class, I learned how to do this. I met this guy in my class who wanted to be friends, and we got to be friends. And he was like, hey, I'm learning how to roast from this guy in Seattle. I think you should meet him. And that guy was a guy named John Sanders, who turned out to be my mentor, who would eventually be my mentor in the business. And he, for whatever reason, we met and we got along well. And he, for some reason, opened his doors, welcomed me, this unknown dude from the East Coast, into his fold. And so over the next progression of several months, I would get to know him very well. But this is where it started. And then I got to meet his barista, Bronwyn Cerna, who would become the barista champion of America the next year. But, we went around and like at the trade show, and they introduced me to this other guy who worked for Zoka Coffee, one of their baristas, and he made me this espresso macchiato. Man, fantastic. So like two defining moments of coffee at one trade show. Like I've always said that, you can't really get great coffee at a trade show. That's not necessarily true. I mean, you can. Like this is definitely one of those times where I'm at the trade show, and now his name slips my mind, but he's working at the bar, making espresso drinks, and he's like, makes me this macchiato, espresso macchiato. They're like a little tiny one, right? Oh, man. And again, I think very blueberry-ish. I think there's some good blueberry naturals in this blend, but man, it is super delicious. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, man, this is like beyond what I had expected in coffee, right? So ever since that time, I have always enjoyed and loved blueberry naturals. But in the recent years, I don't recall really having much exposure to blueberry naturals. I think it's kind of fallen out of vogue, it feels like. Like one of the best examples was the 2007 Edido Misty Valley from Ethiopia, like super blueberry fruit. Like I just can't believe how beautiful the blueberry was. And I know a lot of people don't like blueberry. There's a lot of people within the industry that are, trusted and respected industry people that are like, that blueberry natural stuff is all like defect, fermentation defects. They should be eliminated from the industry. Psh, to those people. But anyway, let's have a look at this coffee. So this is a coffee that was sourced from Sweet Maria's, and it's the Guji Buku. And so these beans are pretty small. It says on Sweet Maria's notes. Now I did provide a link in the description to the wrong coffee. I thought it was the Ethiopia Guji Dabaye, which is what I put the link to. But I messaged Porter, who bought and roasted the coffee before we started, and he's like, he messaged me back. He's like, oh, no, it's the Buku. And I was like, oh, the Buku. And part of the reason I was thinking the Guji, because Matt was telling me what he couldn't remember the name of it when he gave me the sample. He was like, it's kind of like, sounds like something you'd say to a baby. Like, yes. And I was like, oh, it must be Guji, because Guji, right? And then on the website, Sweet Maria's live website, it's only the only Guji. There's only one Guji, but so I found it on on their website. I'll update the link after we're done. But anyway, this coffee is pretty expensive. It's probably like $9 or so. And they say that it's 92.1 on their scoring system. And, the guys at Sweet Maria's are very, very good cuppers. They're very good, they're very good green buyers and cuppers. So this is going to be, you can rest assured that if they're saying that it's 92, it's not like some other review sites that are like 3 points higher. So that this is fairly accurate. And let's get into it here. Peter's with us. What's going on, Peter? Man, how are things in Singapore? And George, good morning. How was your Friday? Friday fiesta was excellent. Was it Friday? No, it was Thursday was the fiesta. Friday was recovery. Man, it was just a bit craziness. Anyway, we're going to make this coffee, so let's have a look at it. So screen size 13 and under, so really small beans overall. Now, Porter was like, it was his first time using the Gießen, and he roasted all 5 pounds that he bought. So he roasted at one point, and he says to me in his message, that they think that he roasted a little too quickly. The heat could have been turned way down for the second half to help the sugars development, and that could all be true. But I don't know, maybe sometimes I wonder, like, are you don't have to like make up. Sometimes I think that we feel that we want to give excuses to people, but I don't need those excuses. I'm not really worried about it. I'm really more concerned about the enjoyment of the moment. Although it's not giving much aromatics. I don't know if it's the monkey pot is interfering with it, or oh my, I'm just wasting it. But let us see how much coffee we have here. But I think it looks fairly even. Maybe it could be a little bit. Maybe those things are true, but I'm not terribly worried about it. Oh, well, we have 14 grams. And we're 10 grams short of our normal. All right, so here's the thing. So this is why we talk about doing. I like to use, people always talk about, this is where we have recipes, right? So a lot of people will use things like 1 to 17 ratio or 1 to 15 ratio. They use these ratios. I'm just like, man, that's just, honestly, it's just too much thinking. I don't want to have to think before my coffee too much. Like, I've already thought about, let's say in this case, right, we're doing green. I've already thought about what coffee to buy. I've spent a lot of energy trying to buy the coffee. I spent money buying the coffee. I've spent time waiting for the coffee to arrive. I've taken the time to roast the coffee. So I've spent all this time roasting the coffee and thinking about all of that. I don't really want to think about the brewing process, right? Like, I don't want to sit there and think, okay, now I've got 17 grams. I'm going to put that to 1, and I don't even understand how those ratios work, because I never think about it in that way. I just think, let's take our coffee. We need 2 grams for every finished ounce. I think it's a super simple way to do it, right? Much easier. And you take your 2 grams, you take 2 grams for every finished ounce, and then you take so if you want to make 120 ounces, a full gallon, you need 256 grams. Or if we have, reversely, we have 14 grams of coffee, divide that by 2, 7 ounces. So there it is, 7 ounces. 7 ounces. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. How many milliliters is 7 ounces?
7 fluid ounces is 207.01 milliliters.
There it is, 200. Thank you, Siri. So we've got 210. We need 210 milliliters instead of our normally 350. So much. To my simpleton method, it's much simpler to do that. All right, we're going to change back our thing to the center, the 20 in our all right, it's 20 setting, and let's do it. All right, here we go. Here we go. We've got the coffee grinding. So if you're just joining us, we're going to be doing this ground coffee with 14 grams of coffee. We're going to make 7 ounces of total coffee brewed, or total brewed coffee. Gosh, I feel kind of tired, so I'm like, oh man, everything feels a little bit slower. All right, so let's put this away. And I thought that today I would do this in the ODZ. The ODZ dripper from Thailand that was gifted to me by Keone Nunes. Thank you very much, Keone. Good to have you, man. And we're going to use the Cafec Abaca paper filters for our brewing here. And there's ODZ. Let's open that up. Oh, such a nice packaging, right? And because these don't have a base, we're just going to use that on one of these. So it just sits there like that. I guess what I should worry about is, what do you do after you're finished? Like, you just set it down like it's porcelain, so it feels like it would probably take a good beating, but it's only one, and I don't want to lose it. All right, so let's get our thing here. We're going to take this. Now, despite the fact that we've changed the quantity of our brew, instead of using 350 milliliters, we're going to be using 210. We still want to have the same brew time. Like, we're trying to have the same exposure time of the coffee to the water, regardless of the quantity differences, right? So we've got our little Cafec filter here. Just gonna I think we need the, well, maybe this we don't need to, but we'll do it anyway. We'll fold it over. Put that in there, good. Whoops. Put that in there. Get our coffee, our 14 grams. Oh, now that it's ground, now I'm starting to get some berry notes. Still a little bit of a roastiness. And of course, I've got a little bit of sniffles, so that could also be a big part of it. Reset that. Here's our timer. Let's get our kettle out here. Kettle. Water is just off the boil. So let's do a little bit of a different. We're gonna use this, and let's brew maybe just about 50 grams to start off with for our initial bloom phase. I didn't get much sleep last night. Actually, I didn't sleep at all until like 6 a.m. I was pretty much just lying in bed the whole time, just feeling like I can't sleep. It was almost as though I had just flown a trip from, let's say, from here to Japan or Asia, and I was sitting around my second night in town is always one where you just I can't sleep the whole night. And then I just have to suffer the next day. But I was able to get a couple hours sleep, like around 6:30 or so, I think. All right, 69 grams. We're at a minute now. Now, normally we're going to push to 100 grams per minute, but we're going to go a little bit slower than that as far as our pour, because we don't want to finish the pour early. And as always, I'm just trying to keep the ground saturated. So 103, we're about halfway there now, and a minute 36. So that's pretty good. Over the weekend, I'm doing some research for some of the upcoming videos, and I was reading some articles about a place called Mocha Coffee in Tokyo that I know the owner, Maiko Miyake. I've known her for like 10 years. Really nice person. And one of the interesting things that as I read about this, she talks about in one of the articles. She talks about her pouring technique. But of course, the article's kind of older. And at least the nice thing about this is that I know her personally, and she speaks English because my Japanese is terrible. And it makes it easier. So now I can actually call her and be like, hey, these are the things that I saw in these articles. Are they accurate? So that's a nice thing. I can check accuracy for some of these, for one of the upcoming videos. It won't come out for a few weeks, but I'm trying to do some of the research before I actually get to the editing stage of the videos themselves. Trying to get better with the workflow. All right, so far so good. 187, 3 minutes. So we can pretty much go to 210. There we go, 210. Good. Now, you might have noticed this shirt that I'm wearing, this thing that says Maine, looks kind of like the Ramones t-shirt. This is at Maine, actually stands for Mid-Atlantic Northeast, and it's one of the coffee conferences that used to take place every year. That was hosted by, at first it was hosted by Cosmic Cup Coffee of Pennsylvania in Easton, PA, and then their roasting partner. Oh no. The owner's a buddy of mine, and I can't remember the name. Oh gosh. Anyway, they're up in a really wonderful roaster up in Providence, Rhode Island. So they partnered over, and eventually they took it over, and they took it up to Providence. And I think I was a speaker at them, but we did it for like 8 years, and it was really a wonderful. I feel it was the best coffee conference in the industry because of its intimacy, right? The intimacy is really a great factor. Like, you would come there and, as an attendee, and you would be able to meet these people and work with these people who were definitely leaders in the industry. And you could spend time and interact with them and talk to them, and not just in a formal session, but because everyone's hanging out the whole weekend, you get that time alone with them. And that was, to me, that's a value, a really great value to have. George says that I love the appearance of the ODZ, but it still strikes me that the opening is too big or too wide. Well, I get what you're saying. Like, especially we compared to a lot of other brewers, definitely a wider opening. But I think that we showed here in this that it's not necessarily the amount of brew, but understanding how to control. I mean, not the amount of the opening, but how to control your brew, right? And so, like, for example, because it's big, right, we want to definitely have better control of it. So that may mean that we may need to go finer with the grind to create greater resistance to the coffee, right, to the flow of the water. Or in the case of, let's say, these other types like the Bee House and other ones that have smaller orifices that give more restriction, you may have to go a little bit coarser, pour a little bit harder. So these are all different things that, as you're trying to learn how to brew, that you may have to consider at some point. But I don't necessarily know that having a larger hole is necessarily a bad thing, or is not as advantageous as having a tighter hole. You mean, I think you can think about it. It may work out in some ways like that, but I don't necessarily think that it's a big problem, unless it's super tiny, and then you really have to control it. Makes the techniques of one's pouring more important. It does. I think it's more. And I don't know if it's necessarily a technique. Like when people talk about technique, I think about, what are the things they're doing, but more about, to me, it's more about controlling your water flow. That's why like the tips of your kettles are rather important, because the tips of the kettles allow you to control the flow of the water, or the way the water pours, right? That you can control. And these two are really good in that you can pour them in such a way so that there's a very tight and controlled stream. And you can make it a tight stream, and you can make it a more controlled fall. First time I've ever thought about phrasing it that way. And I think those are the things that you want to look for in kettles. There are certain kettles on the market that are nice, and one of them, for example, the Bonavita comes to mind. Like the Bonavita is great because you get the electric one, and it's got this great electronic control, so you can control the water, but ergonomically, the handle and then the way the shape of the spout just isn't as good as the Bono, right? So it's not as precise in control, and so it's not as pleasurable to use. And in some respects, a lot of it is about pleasure to use, right? You want to have pleasure in using your tools, because that pleasure translates into enjoyment as well as making your task of creating the coffee easier. And I think that's true for anything. As we know, like George, as you know, in the world of cigars, we talk about like, is that DuPont line lighter, is it doing any different a job than the Bic soft flake? Not really. But the pleasure you get out of using that DuPont line is so much more greater. And I think that's where a lot of this comes in. Like any kettle will do. How much pleasure do you get to use it? Right? Peter says, what's a good temperature? Here's the truth. I don't really pay terribly close attention to water temperature. What I'm looking for is water temperature within a range. So I'm typically bringing the water in the kettle, like in our shows here, I'm bringing it to a boil. I'll bring it to a rolling boil, and it'll just be sitting here. You might not be able to hear it a lot of times, but it's just sitting here out of the camera shot, and a lot of times it's just boiling away. I do put a bit of water there so it boils, and I want to have it as maximum boiling as possible, and then I'll take it and put it into the kettle, one of these two, typically. And the kettles, typically, when I put them in there, is not preheated. They're just kind of room temperature. So they're probably about 73 degrees or so. By taking and so we're presuming that it's still at 212. Or let's say it drops down to 209 in the kettle. I'm going to take that 209 water, and I'm going to pour it into here. Now, I always will typically pour it pretty full, right? At least to here. Why? Because I know that this 72 degree or 68 degree, depending how cold I keep the air conditioner, kettle is going to absorb that heat, drop the temperature of the water down. So what I want is greater thermal mass of water to offset the coolness of this. Plus, I may babble on for a little bit, so I want to have a good mass of water so that it can hold it. The temperature won't fall, right? The lower amount of water you put in your kettle, the faster that will fall in temperature. And then I always will put that lid back on pretty much right away, because I want to try to encase that. Now, by this point, typically the time that I do that, I'll pour it. I'm reasonably sure that the water is somewhere between 195 Fahrenheit to probably under 200 by that point, but somewhere right around there. And that is solid temperatures for brewing your coffee, right? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're right. So when I'm saying 100, 200, let's remember that, I'm from the US, and we tend to think in Fahrenheit. And so 212 or 209, I mean, that's just not possible, right? In Celsius with atmospheric water, it's just not possible, right? We can't. The maximum we can do is 100. So In the case of Celsius, I'm trying to keep it maybe, by the time that it comes out, it's probably 98. And then it'll probably fall, as I pour it into here, probably 95. Right? And to me, that's an acceptable range for brewing. That's not bad. I think it's fine. Especially if I'm brewing at home, like for myself. When it comes to brewing for myself, it's even looser. Like for me, it's like I don't worry. At home, I don't really worry about it. Like if I go and brew coffee for myself, like let's say this afternoon, I decide, hey, I want to have a coffee. I've got my concha. I'll brew up water in a kettle upstairs in the kitchen, and I'll have my clever, and I'll grind up it nice and fine, put the coffee in there. I brew it up, and man, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But honestly, I'm paying attention to the grind. I'm paying attention to the quantity of both the coffee and the water. But I don't really pay too close attention to the temperature. I bring the water to a boil, and sometimes I'll pour it like into the clever directly from the boiling kettle. Like I may, I'll shut it off and let it cool down slightly. But it's not, the temperature's not diving in those kettles, right? It's just kind of like gradually lowering. So I may pop the lid open for a couple seconds to see if I can get a little bit extra dissipation. But man, I'm just gonna go for it. But I'm also not worried necessarily about brewing with very delicate coffees. Like if I was brewing a lot of really, really light roasted, florality, light, delicate coffees, like let's say geisha, and I wanted to have that, and I roasted it really light, and I wanted to highlight that lightness and that brightness and all that, I would be a little bit more careful with the water temperature then, because I want to highlight those characters. But honestly, for my own personal drink, I almost never want to highlight those things. Like I don't really want to have bright coffees. I don't really want to have light coffees. So my criteria for personal enjoyment is different than a lot of people. And that's perfectly fine. Like if you want to have that, then you should pay attention to the temperatures. And and the nice thing about nowadays with these newer tools, like if you have like the Fellow Stag kettle, which is a kettle that I'll tell you about, but I would never use it myself. You can use those and have really tight control over your pouring kettle temperature. And that's a wonderful thing. Now, why don't I like the Stag kettle? Mainly because it has a flow restrictor, and it's somewhere in its path, which just makes me infuriated, right? Like I want to be able to pour at different flow rates based on my feeling, my needs, my desires, my wants, right? The Stag kettle does not allow you to do that. It forces you to pour in one stream. And I'm a freedom guy, right? We want to have freedom, right? Right? This is America. We want freedom. So those are my rants and thoughts on all this. Let's see. Did I miss? George says, the joy of superior design enhances many Epicurean pursuits. Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I've been working on this project for a cutting board. And it's more about the cutting board is utilitarian. Cutting boards are utilitarian. Like you can buy anything. But I got this one that's about this big, about that big. And I've been making it. It's made out of mahogany. But why? Because it's pretty. That's really it. It's pretty. And George says, so you lose some temperature. Yes, absolutely. Whenever you transfer from from your boiling kettle into your pouring kettle, you will lose some temperature, right? You can mitigate that by preheating this, right? So if I decided that, I don't want to lose any of the temperature, and I poured a little bit in here, brought it up to some level of temperature, right? So instead of being at like 70, maybe now it's 90, 95 or whatever, and then added the rest of it, Fahrenheit, Peter. Then I would add the rest of it, and then, then I would have the water at a better range. Peter says that I find as I sip the cup, it gets better as the coffee cools. Yeah, and what's happening there is that And this is why sometimes I don't drink the coffees that we're brewing right away, because we're just letting it time to cool. Because with most, I'll say beverages, with a lot of beverages, we tend to serve them, at least here in the United States, we tend to serve a lot of beverages outside of their optimal tasting range. So, for example, with coffee, we tend to serve it really hot. And when it's really hot, it kind of occludes the flavor. But as the coffee cools, that flavor, that the reduction of the heat allows the flavors to express themselves more cleanly on your palate, right? So your ability to perceive is enhanced by the cooling of the coffee. It's not always like that as far as like hot to cold. Like some things have to be cold. Like if you're drinking sodas, Coca-Cola, for example, is a great example. You know, a carbonated beverage, it needs to be served cold for its best expression. Otherwise, it starts to be a little bit too sweet, right? If you ever tried like warm room temperature Coca-Cola versus cold Coca-Cola, I think most people will tend to find that the room temperature is much sweeter, because in that case, the cold is kind of deadening your palate's ability to taste, right? So it's interesting to see that. Oh, let's get our tasting going on. Get our tasting going on. Like resting on cooked steak. Yes, exactly. All right, let's have a look here. This is our liquid. Different quantity, but same brew ratio, right? Okay, so we can see here, compared to some of our other coffees that we've had here on the show, we don't have as much translucency, right? This one's a little bit darker, so probably meaning that it's a little bit deeper roasted than the other coffees we've had. All this AC just kind of gives me the sniffles. I think there's a little bit of roastiness to it there. I'm not getting a lot of pronunciation on like fruity aromatics or fragrance. Oh yeah, there's definitely a little bit of roasting error there. Now it's definitely a little bit roasty for sure. You can kind of taste a little bit of bitterness on it, a little bit of harshness that's due to the application. Like it's almost like it's baked. It's more baked than anything. And this is something that can happen because, you know, this is, like I said, this is Porter's first time on the Gießen. It's a 6 kilo Gießen. You're only roasting 5 pounds. So there's quite a big, you know, you've got a lot of power at your availability. And so what did he say? He said he thought that he thought the roast time was too short. Yeah, a little bit too short. Roasted a little too quickly. The heat could have been turned way down for the second half. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. So if you're learning a new roaster is always difficult. Like you know, I did my first roast on it last week or 2 weeks ago, and you know, it took me a little bit of time to like understand it. I mean, I did some roasts. We did some test roasts on it a few weeks ago, so I was, you know, a little bit more attuned to it. And then like when I was roasting on my friend Sarah, she has a Dietrich IR12, one of the high end ones, like the one that has all the fully automation on it with the computer systems. You know, and it takes a while to like get used to a new roaster. So this kind of thing is not unusual. It's just a matter of like, really, you have to take more time to learn how to use the roaster, which is why we talked about roasting last week or the week before. I mentioned that somebody messaged me and they was like, hey, you know, what kind of roaster should I buy? And I was like, you know, if you have these smaller roasters, they're, you know, if you're trying to do volume with a small roaster, it's super like, it's just painful at times. Like it's painful. But the advantage of the smaller roaster versus the larger roaster is that you get repeatability. You get more time in the saddle. So for example, like I said, if I'm roasting on my roaster, which is a 3 kilo roaster, Petroncini, versus Sarah's 12 kilo roaster, I can do a 15-pound, I can finish 15-pound bucket. So we serve them in bucket. We serve to our wholesale clients in 5-gallon food grade buckets, right? Which will hold about 15 pounds of coffee roasted. It'll hold 18 pounds. So typically we'll go in with 18, come out with 15. Somewhere right around there. But the thing is that for me to finish a 15-pound bucket on a 12 kilo, I can do it in one shot. So 10, 12, 15 minutes, done, finished, easy, right? But if I want to do that same quantity in my 3-kilo roaster, it takes me an hour to do it because it takes 4 roasts, right? 4 roasts of 4.5-pound loads. That's how long. So that's how long it'll take. And so while it's painful to do 4 roasts instead of 1, it's more educational because now you get more time to actually roast the coffee, learn the roaster, and you also have to work, you really have to pay attention to what you're doing because now when you're doing just one big 15-pound batch, that's how it is. You're done, right? It all goes in one bucket. It's all the same. But if you have to fill it up with 4 different roasts, now you have to really be on the money. You have to figure out, how do I hit the same roast and flavor profile for each of those 4? So it just forces you to become better, faster. So something to think about. Using a larger roaster means you are committed to your protocol for quite a bit. Yeah, the downside of the positive thing about the larger roaster is that you can finish your workday faster. The problem, the downside is if you make a mistake, your mistake is much more amplified because now you burned a lot more coffee. Like if I burn a batch in the 3 kilo, okay, that sucks. That's 1 roast that totally like hoses my pace. But the financial impact and on everything is much smaller than, let's say, if I had the 12 kilo and I'm running, 15 to 18 pounds, or larger roasters with larger quantities, you hose those and you're like, oh man, that's really painful. All right, so how does this taste otherwise? There's definitely some bitter notes. There's definitely some roasty, like baked notes to it. Matt was really excited because he was like, hey, there's really a lot of blueberry, but I'm not really getting a lot of blueberry. I'm looking for blueberry. I'm always on the lookout for blueberry naturals like this. I haven't had that expression of like clear, strong blueberry in well over 10 years. I miss it. But a good first effort. Like this is, it's roasty enough that, if you had like your powdered donut, your chocolate donut, that would be nice. George Porter. Porter was the one who bought the coffee and roasted the coffee on Matt's roaster. Peter's asking, do you like bitter melon notes? I do not. I am not a fan of bitter melon. My mom, my aunt, my brother, I think my brother too, everybody I know, but a lot of my family, ampalaya, they'll eat it, they'll tear it up. Like there's a traditional dish in Philippine cuisine called pinakbet. I don't even eat it. I'm just like, I love the idea of the vegetables. I love the idea of the of the pork with the bagoong, that salted fish shrimp paste. I love all that. But ampalaya, man, no. That's where I just don't go there. And no amount of like boiling or baking or any of that can like eliminate the bitter. I just don't like the bitter, which is why I don't like IPAs. I'm not a big bitter person. There could be some bitterness, but if it's pronounced like the bitter melon or like in IPAs, like heavy IPAs, that's not for me. It's just not for me. That's all. All right. Anyway, thank you very much. That's it for today. 45 minutes. We should get out. But good to see all of you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Appreciate you being here as always. George, Peter, Dan, Mom, everybody. Always nice to see you, especially since it's been like 5 days since we've done a live stream. Feels like it's been like 2 weeks. But back again, we'll probably have a little bit of an abbreviated, or we may only do until Wednesday this week because I'm on Thursday supposed to head up to New Jersey for the 200th episode of the Coffee and Cigars live stream that we're going to do at 8 p.m. Thursday night Eastern time on the Ono Live channel. It's our weekly Coffee and Cigars live stream. So we're going to be up in New Jersey at a place called the Tobacco Shop of Ridgewood, New Jersey. So if you happen to be in the area, come join us. Plan on come join us. We're going to have a bit of swag to give away. So yeah. All right. Until next time, George, Mom, everybody, good to see you guys. Hope you have a wonderful day. And back in tomorrow, 10 a.m. See you then.